FirstCaribbean International Bank Limited has announced recently that the sale of its assets in St. Kitts and Nevis to the Kitts-Nevis-Anguilla National Bank will not go ahead. According to a press release from FirstCaribbean, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, ECCB, provided conditional approval for the sale of the assets and banking business of FirstCaribbean International Bank Barbados Limited, FCIB Barbados, in St. Kitts to the Kitts-Nevis-Anguilla National Bank, the SKNANB, on July 15, 2022. Subject to certain conditions. The National Bank recently informed FCIB Barbados that it has not secured final approval from the ECCB to conclude the acquisition. The ECCB subsequently notified FCIB Barbados of its decision to not grant final approval for the sale of its operations in St. Kitts. Notwithstanding the denial of approval outlined, FirstCaribbean said in a press release, the ECCB remains fully engaged with FCIB Barbados as it continues to assess its operational footprint in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. This means that FirstCaribbean International Bank Limited will retain its presence in St. Kitts and has announced plans to transform the way it does business on the island. Chief Executive Officer of CIBC FirstCaribbean, Mark St. Hill, noted that while the ending of the sale process is disappointing for the bank, CIBC FirstCaribbean will take advantage of this opportunity to refine its business in St. Kitts. Managing Director for the bank in Barbados and the OCS countries, Donna Wellington, concurred. She went on to thank both staff and clients for their commitment to the bank and noted that the bank plans to eventually transform its branch and network in Basseterre to be able to provide access to both in-person and digital banking services to St. Kitts, with the installation of smart ABMs and other self-serve products that allow customers to choose how and where they bank with CIBC FirstCaribbean. The news comes as other indigenous banks in the OACS have taken over the assets of foreign banks. The most notable one in St. Kitts and Nevis is the sale of RBC to a conglomerate of banks inclusive of Bank of Nevis in 2021. Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Timothy Antoine, was asked about this new development in the sub-region during the St. Kitts and Nevis version of Conversation with the Governor in February.
Most of the assets in the banking system are now under our indigenous banks. I say good news because it means that the commanding heights of the banking system are now owned by the people of our region. Governments, social security schemes, systems, individuals. Yes? 2/3 of all banking assets in the currency union are now in indigenous hands. We own it. So that's good. These indigenous banks are not going to cut and run. That's good. And here's the other good thing. They are larger. Many of them are now billion-dollar banks, which means that they are more attractive to correspondent banks. So whereas before, one of the reasons why they were having issues with the correspondent banking relations was because they were deemed to be too small relative to the risk, the profit relative to the risk. They're always assessing that, these correspondent banks. Now these indigenous banks are bigger. They are more attractive. So the pressures of correspondent banks, those pressures have eased as a result of our indigenous banks becoming larger. Now, having said that, I will say, as a representative of the regulator, that to whom much is given, much is required. So we have a high expectation on corporate governance in respect of our indigenous banks, and we have to continue to monitor them very closely on behalf of the people.
Andre Huey, SKN Newsline.